Hello again, my friends. Welcome back to Desert Sky Adventures and welcome back to Tombstone. I'm in the backyard today. I've got a backyard update, so let's jump right in. So just a couple weeks ago, I released a video called the Tombstone Backyard Mystery, and it was more or less about the objects in my backyard, where they came from, and why they're here. Make sure you go back and watch that first video before you watch this one, because it'll make a lot more sense. I'll put the link in the description. After posting that video, I did get a good amount of feedback from you guys, and I learned a few things along the way that I wanted to share with you. I got a good amount of speculation and guesses from many people, but also a few people chimed in who claimed to know the owner of this property before I lived here. One viewer, who I'm assuming lives around here, commented that the poles here are definitely telegraph poles and that those railroad tracks definitely came from Tombstone, according to one viewer who seems to know the area pretty well. He says, if your place is the one I think it is, those tracks used to have a railroad frog and dual rail combiner. And if you look right here, there's no doubt about it. This is a dual rail joiner. So that viewer knew what he was talking about when it comes to this track. He also says the numbers on those poles are the telephone pole numbers, which led me to more questions, because if they were telephone pole numbers, why would you have the same number on two different poles? And that's the only number there. The other poles don't have any numbers on them at all. He also says that the old man that lived here before us was a collector. So in that case, it's pretty plausible that this stuff came from Tombstone. This guy got it somehow, put it back here just because he liked the stuff. I did actually reach back out to that viewer to try and get some more information, but they did not respond. Now, a few of you were able to recognize one of these metal objects back here, but this one right here, I had a few of you guys comment that this piece of metal, this is known as PSP, or pierced steel planking, also known apparently as a Marston mat. And what this stuff was temporary runway. As far as I understand, this is from the World War II or possibly Korean War era, but in places where they need to build a runway and do it quickly, they could piece a bunch of these together and make a runway. So I searched online and those people were correct. There's plenty of photos from back in the day of entire runways being built of this stuff in Hawaii and other locations. So that at least explains what this piece of metal is. And again, if the guy that lived here was a collector, it's a cool little piece of history right there. Who knows where it came from or if it was ever used. But we at least identified what this is and a reason for why it might be here. I had another viewer contact me by email, and this is what they said. They said, where you live, I only know a few things told to me by someone who no longer lives here. But she told me, as we would drive past that house, that an old-timer couple had lived there for years and years. And the yard always used to look nice, and he was always outside working. When he died, the property became very overgrown, and it was evident that it was something that he was doing and that he loved. But there's someone who has corroborating evidence of an elderly couple that lived here. And he was apparently always working in the yard, so that would go pretty good with this collector story. The guy took a lot of pride in the stuff that he collected and did a lot of work on his yard. She continues, they may have lived here when the railroad tracks were pulled up in 1964. So again, maybe it was something that they were easily obtainable, low price, maybe even free. Took it off somebody's hands and threw it back here in the yard just for historical purposes. She also included this article from the Tombstone Epitaph. This is from July 23rd of 1970. Downtown overhead wiring, long a thorn in the side of persons interested in the appearance of the city, has been blamed for many things, not least of which assertion that because of the unsightly wires, a number of motion picture firms have decided against filming in the famed town Too Tough to Die. It goes on to say that through the efforts of Harold O. Love, president of Historic Tombstone Adventures, the city has received a pledge of funds amounting to at least $24,000 as a gift from the James B. Beam Yes, Jim Beam. Distilling Company. City Council on January 26, 1970 accepted the promised royalties, commemorating the old camp, and earmarked it to help pay for placing power and telephone wires underground on Allen Street between 3rd and 6th Streets. So those power poles came down sometime in the early 1970s. And again, that would fit in with the timeline of the old couple that used to live here. All this stuff kind of plays into the 60s, 70s, and I happen to know that this house was built in the late 60s, so time-wise, everything lines up. So it's probably pretty likely that this stuff did come from Tombstone. If this guy was a collector, that it perfectly explains why all this stuff is here. Maybe it came from Tombstone, maybe it didn't. But that would be a good explanation as to why this stuff is here. Somebody put in a lot of time with the rocks, and there's a lot of lava rock, which, if I'm not mistaken, there's no lava rock anywhere around here. So all the lava rock on this property was brought in from somewhere far away. Well, she doesn't seem to be intimidated by me in the least. So we may never know for sure if these old telegraph poles here actually came from Tombstone or not. We don't have a whole lot to compare them to other than old photos. But when it comes to the railroad tracks over here, I do know of a place where we'll have something to compare it to. And that place is right here at the old Southern Pacific Railway Depot. Still here after all these years. Today it's a Tombstone Library, but if there's one place in town where there's going to be something that we can compare the tracks to, it's going to be right here, because these are the original Tombstone Railroad tracks. So I came down to the railway depot to see if I could make any comparisons, and also to see if I can find anything I could match up with some of the equipment in the backyard. But a couple things you notice right off the bat. The rail ties are farther apart. The tracks in Tombstone are about 61.5 inches across, whereas the tracks in the backyard are about 43 inches, maybe just shy of 43 inches. So not a disqualifier. Maybe when this stuff was put back together, it wasn't built back to spec, and if you're not using it for a train, you don't really need to build it to spec. On the Tombstone tracks, you can see this metal rail joiner. And here's something very similar on the backyard tracks. Not identical, but they do look very similar, especially with those square head bolts. Also notice the condition of the track in Tombstone compared to the track in the backyard and how rusted this stuff is. It almost makes me wonder if this track came from some sort of industrial application, maybe a mine. The rails in the Tombstone track are 5 inches on the bottom and 3 inches on the top. And we have the exact same dimensions in the backyard, 5 on the bottom, 3 on the top. But here's where it gets interesting. The Tombstone tracks are just under 5 inches tall. The backyard tracks are about 5 3/4 inches tall. So there is not a match there. I can't say if that's equipment that cannot be used together, but that is definitely interesting to note. One of the viewers told me to take a look at the rails, and there should be a date stamped in there. And I found a couple in the Tombstone tracks. Here's 1899. Here's one from 1897. And they may be that old, but the train didn't run here until 1903. I believe this one says Illinois Steel Company South, maybe. On the backyard tracks, it does appear that there's some kind of marking there, but I cannot make it out. It's so rusty, it's almost impossible to tell what this said. And again, the condition of the rails, Tombstone's tracks, not that bad. Much better condition than the backyard tracks. Now here are some of the rail ties. I noticed on a couple of the Tombstone tracks we had these markings, LM80. This one looks like it says LM88 maybe. The problem with the backyard is that our rail ties are covered by earth and rock, so I don't have a way to see the end of them. At least most of them. There are 3 right here where the ends are exposed, and I did look, but there are no markings on the sides of those rail ties. So far, nothing really matches up. I looked at the metal plates on the Tombstone tracks, and especially the markings on them, to try and match up anything with what we see in the backyard. And it looks like all of these plates are a little different in some way. Some of them appear older, some of them appear a little newer, but they all have different markings on them, and they're all a little bit different. This is the backyard plate, and we have a few of these plates back here, but this is really the only one that has any kind of distinctive markings on it. And you can clearly see the word Colorado. I checked every plate in the Tombstone location. None of them say Colorado. But again, not a disqualifier. This railroad ran for 60 years, so it is plausible that through that time, the manufacturers of these replacement parts were different, and they might look a little different. Now over here to the side of the depot in this empty lot is another piece of track with an old caboose sitting on it. And I noticed that there are rail ties sitting around here today. They're being used as like parking stops, but some of them still have the plates attached to them, just like these ones here in the backyard. Could some of these rail ties in the backyard have been originally from down here? It's very hard to say, but that railroad has been out of commission for well over half a century, and parts of it are still laying in town. I came across this interesting story from 2007 about these two railroad tycoons. They had a plan to have a freight and passenger train line that started in New York and ended here in Tombstone, using all the existing line. It was going to be a really big moneymaker for both Cochise County and the city of Tombstone. And both of these guys apparently knew it was going to be a very long path to get this done with all the red tape and whatnot, but they were both up to the task. Eventually, one of the tycoons became very fed up with the amount of time it was taking, and he wasn't really getting any responses, and he decided to pull the plug. So he sold what was left of those rail lines for scrap to try and save some of his prior investment. Really kind of a sad story. Which, of course, the other railroad tycoon was very upset by this, understandably. But he said that the rail was being torn up piece by piece. We will never get the railroad back. So not only does the county lose the history, but a chance at the extra commerce. When asked if there were any railroads left in Cochise County, the man stated that the tracks to Douglas were torn up, Sierra Vista, Sonoyta, Pagonia, and to Nogales, all torn up. But yes, there are historic tracks and a caboose in Tombstone, and this is what's left of it today. But you can tell by looking at the rails here in the backyard tracks that these were demolished. There was no care given to try and put these back together. These were cut and removed quickly. So it's very hard to say if they came from Tombstone or any of those other removed lines here in Cochise County. That happened sometime in the early 2000s. So after looking at all the evidence and learning as much as I can about the subject and trying to find as much information as possible, I think I might have a few more questions than answers, unfortunately. But there are a few things that we can probably say for sure. This stuff I do think is all real stuff. I think it was all really used at one point. I think it's all very old. When it was used, where it came from, hard to say for sure. But one thing is for sure. The guy that lived here at some point in the past, he was really into collecting this old stuff. And he unfortunately passed away, so all of the stuff that he put back here is safe as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to move any of it, do anything with it. I think it's all pretty cool stuff, and to be honest, it's one of the things that drew me to this property was just all the cool old stuff out back. And this stuff isn't going anywhere, so to the old guy who put all this stuff here, I appreciate your efforts. It's definitely cool stuff, and I just want you to know that it's safe with me. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for today, guys. This mystery, unfortunately, is going to go unsolved, but I do appreciate you coming along with us and taking a walk back through time, trying to figure out where this stuff came from. But I hope you enjoyed the video. I definitely thank you for watching, and until next time, have a happy Thanksgiving. We'll see you down the road.